And it is a world of embarrassment.
Crazy.
It is a complete world of embarrassment, but we're
Horrible.
thrilled to be here. Absolutely horrible, but it's wonderful at the same time. We have a wonderful show in store for us today, but before we get into that, first of all, like I do every week, I want to thank the great folks here at Riverview Studios. If you have any filming needs at all, come to the studio, check out the interior, walk along the Delaware River for the exterior. It's beautiful here, but more important than the facilities are the great and talented people who work here. It's just a wonderful, there we go. It's a wonderful facility. We've had some fun here today. You guys got to watch a horrific video. We have a dear old friend, at least of mine and of many people who watch the show with us, Todd Yasui. Todd, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Davey.
So we have all sorts of things to talk about. You're a TV producer in LA. I can't remember. I've known you for 36 years. I can't remember all the things, so we have them typewritten here. But before we get into any of that,
Yes.
you know our tradition here on Guitar Tales.
It has something to do with Bon Jovi.
Yes, so
Okay.
we play 6 Degrees of John Bon Jovi. I would guess that you have probably 30 ways to get there.
I might have met Bon Jovi, so that would be 1 degree. Is that correct?
Under our rules, it would be 0 degrees.
0 degrees. Okay, so I honestly don't recall.
Okay.
And it sounds stupid and it sounds arrogant, but just over the years, I've run into a lot of them, and I'm sure he has done one of the shows I've done.
All right.
So I'm sure I've talked to him and met him, but I honestly don't remember. But I've met a lot of musicians who probably played with him. So can I have a 0 degree and like a 34th degree?
Right,
just
so
by
what we're
saying
going to
it?
do, we're going to give you an unofficial, written in pencil, winner trophy
Oh,
right now.
I'll take it.
And again, there's one person, and I always say this, is one person who could beat you now, and you're 40 miles away in Rumson, so, you know, I'm just saying.
Right.
So,
Okay. So yes, I might have met Bon Jovi. I don't remember.
okay, so take us a slightly circuitous way there.
Yes. Okay. I met a guy who played drums with his bass player once. I don't know. I'm stretching.
That's really lame.
I'm stretching.
That's really lame.
That was
You're tired.
lame.
You're tired. You just got off a red eye.
I
know
did,
it.
yeah. I got off a red eye, so I normally look 10 years younger.
You could put your glasses on. You were threatened to do that. Let me give you guys a little history. So if you've watched our show before, you hear the really bad outro music. I think it's good drumming. He'll say it's bad drumming. Is Todd. I've known Todd for 36 years. We've played in really not great, but okay bands over the years.
Crappy cover bands.
Yeah, with 3 originals. 3 originals.
3 originals.
Yes. I wrote 1. You wrote 1.5.
Yes.
I think. So I've known Todd for 36 years, and really a lot of our banter about music was my inspiration to get this show started and off the ground, in addition to my old band with Scott Engel, who's our now publicist. You have an amazing story, and we're going to try to cram a lot into maybe a half hour, 35 minutes of show.
We should point out that even though the show is called Guitar Tales, I do not play guitar.
Right.
I don't play.
At all, and you tried earlier.
Yeah, I did.
Now,
But isn't this the truth?
Yes.
Because I've told my kid, if you know D, C, and G on the guitar, you can play literally probably 50, 60 old rock tunes.
I just saw
Knocking on Heaven's Door.
Yeah, I saw, my old band did that. I saw something on YouTube with Ed Sheeran on an interview show, and he said, I will play any pop song in the world in 4 or fewer chords, and they started challenging him, and he did it.
Right.
I want to start right now for our backstory. You have a very old and weathered 36-year-old index card with you.
I do. So I guess I would have been 19 in college at George Washington University. And my roommate and I was trying to learn to play drums. I'd never really played. Warren, my roommate, played bass. And we were like, we should try to get in a band together. And the joke was, I said, well, dude, I am no Neil Peart. I cannot play drums. I'm just learning. I can do basic Charlie Watts, but I can't do anything like Neil Peart and everything. And that became a running joke. I said, oh, these guys, someone's going to expect me to be good. And I look at this thing and it says musicians, exclamation point. And I like how you wrote in parentheses, we have access to PA in parentheses, which by the way, I think was bull.
It was, but we used yours.
Yeah, because you didn't have one.
Yeah.
But it says 2 guitarists looking to form or join band, tasteful classic dance music and originals.
I didn't write that. Dave Hendricks wrote
Prefer
that.
musicians with integrity, and you underlined integrity, or Dave did, the other Dave. All that is now necessary is bass and drums, but keyboards can certainly be checked out. No Neil Peart's need apply. and then, of course, call Dave Cohen and Dave Hendricks.
Right.
So I look at that in the Student Union building. I pull this off. I come back to my roommate, Warren, and I'm going, hey, Warren, we were looking for 2 guitarists, you know. They're looking for a bass player and a drummer, and I read him this thing. I go, no, Neil Peart's need apply. That's me. I suck. And so we called you.
Right.
And
But he didn't believe it.
he didn't believe it. He thought it was a joke.
Because
And
it's such a coincidence.
Which is why I pulled the card off of the bulletin board. One is I didn't want you to find another bass player and drummer, and 2 is I wanted to show my roommate and go like, hey, look what I found. What a coincidence. And he was like, yeah, funny, you wrote that. I'm like, no, I swear I didn't. So we called you. We were at George Washington University. If people that don't know that university, it's an urban university right downtown DC.
Right.
There's no space anywhere to practice, to keep instruments. And I used to keep my crappy drum set taken apart in my closet. I don't know if you remember this. You guys came over to our place because I'm I'm not bringing my drum kits, loading them up and carrying them piece by piece across campus. So you guys came over, and do you remember the first song we jammed to see if we were compatible? I can't believe you don't.
Stones.
Squeeze Box by The Who.
You know, that was cheating on my part because I did that in my Delaware band before I had transferred.
Well, you guys told us, like, hey, let's try Squeeze Box. So anyways, we played Squeeze Box by The Who, and I think I was singing and drumming at the same time. And that was how we started up our little cover band.
We didn't take you away from the drum kit and put you in front till senior year.
Correct.
We had 3 iterations of our band.
Right.
And the video that we were just horrified by, but kind of fun, that was the Thurston Block Party.
No. The
Was it the
video we
Madison
saw,
party?
No, that was
Oh,
a
KitchenAid
KitchenAid party, which was a benefit I organized in college. It was meant to be a nice, heartfelt gesture, but I also wanted to have a reason to have a concert at school that we could play at.
And it was an alcohol-friendly concert.
It was a blast. It was a blast. But we were truly a horrible cover band. I mean, we were good for college to play at frat parties, which is what we did. So eventually, like many, many bands in college, we were fortunate enough to run into those guys. I don't even remember what fraternity it was, but they allowed us
Kappa Sig.
No.
The Delt House.
Was it the Delt House? So
Delta
we were.
Delta.
They were. It was premium. Space was so premium in
Right.
DC, where we went to school, that they had a basement, and that they had a bar, and they would have parties a lot. And they allowed us, if you remember this, to keep our equipment in their basement in exchange for playing at their parties.
On their women, or beck and call.
Right. So whenever they would have a party, they go, you guys want to play? We'd go like, heck yeah. And that in exchange for that, we got to keep our equipment in one place, which at GW was extremely hard.
Right, because we were in the music center for a while, and that really wasn't
Yeah,
very
and the rooms
convenient.
were small, and no one would let you store stuff. So for us, a big part of our college band was playing at the frat house.
And you remember we were playing the first day they were allowed to drink, because they were all on the crew team, and they stole the mic from you for Johnny Be Good. They threw you off the stage, and they sang.
Yeah, they just kind of drunkenly came up and took over the mic, and yeah.
So let me do this.
Yeah.
I want to talk about so we met, right? We had our little index card. We started jamming. Sadly, you've brought pictures with you.
I did. So this is one I wanted to show everybody, and that is Dave Cohen playing guitar, and I just want to make fun of the headband.
You don't know the backstory of the headband.
A white headband, but by the way, this is early 80s, so this would have been, do you know who Mike Reno is?
No.
The lead singer for Loverboy.
Oh, yes.
Remember the ubiquitous headband he had?
That's not a headband, Todd.
You have a thing around your head that might be something else that you're about to tell me.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's not even close to, it's so bad. It's so bad. In high
Somebody's
school.
underwear?
It's not quite as bad as that. In high school, I had the poor taste to actually have a mesh shirt that went this far down. It gets worse. And then
I wish I had pictures of that.
Oh, I'm glad you don't. And the bottom, so it's mesh from the neck down. The bottom was like the band to a pair of underpants. So having no clothes, I actually, at GW, in college, for that gig, took a pair of scissors and took the bottom of a mesh shirt, and then I created a headband.
Wow. Well, it worked for you, Dave. Yeah. I mean, you got and the other thing is the leather jacket with the sleeves pushed up. So this would have been around Miami Vice time.
Or Rick Springfield.
early 80s, Rick Springfield, where everyone wore their jacket sleeves pushed up.
Yeah.
And that's Warren, our bass player, and that's some girl that we all knew.
Yeah.
It was our first version of a groupie. Here's another funny picture of Dave that I took here, and look at that puffy hair. You had some hair back then.
I had hair. Yeah, I don't know what happened to you. You stayed preserved. I didn't.
I was lucky, but that's you and Warren, and that was at a Thurston Block. That was at one of those parties.
Right.
Now, this is a bad picture. We have some other ones. Let's look at this other picture.
Yeah.
There's me at a Thurston Block party.
Looking very
which
rock
was a dorm.
starish.
Well, you notice all the bandanas.
Yeah.
So back then, it was like bandanas were a thing. We all had some. We have a picture of Michael Bernstein with a bandana.
He's got the
Our
little
bass player,
ponytail in the back.
who we're going to see later today.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Davey, you're on stage in shorts.
Which is horrific. And they're not just shorts. They're non-long shorts.
They're like OP or something was like the name
it's
of them
horrible.
or something.
They were
those
literally OPs.
shorts.
They were
But,
literally OPs, yeah.
Yeah, that was fun playing in a crappy cover band in college.
It was. And you know, the whole point of this show is we started this. It's Guitar Tales. It's, you know, yeah, we could listen, and we'll do it later in the show today. We'll hear the tales of famous, successful musicians, but there's a backstory to people whose lives have just had amateur and more so, because we've had on the show, we've had very successful musicians, but the root of the show are the stories that you might not have heard. That's what Scott Engel always talks about. You know, the tales of guitar players you might not have heard.
Right.
And these are stories that are beautiful to us. We share them with our kids who have zero interest in them.
Oh yeah.
Like
I showed a VHS tape of us playing somewhere to my kids, and they were just horrified.
And no patience for something that has such low production and content value.
Right.
So.
But look, it was all fun, and I've never been in an originals band really. I've always done cover tunes because I can't write, and I pretend to sing, but it's more like shouting. But who cares? This is what I say to people. You know, when I would have someone tease me about, oh my God, you know, like, you're still doing rock stuff? That's so stupid. And I'm like, look, no one makes fun of the guy who goes out on the weekend to play with his company softball team.
Right.
It's like, he's not playing company softball team because he thinks he's going to play in the major leagues. He's doing it because it's fun.
Right.
It's like, when I get together with my friends, I don't care how old you are, I don't care how bad of a player you are, when you get a bunch of people together to play music, it's a hobby, it's fun. I don't spend 15 hours on a weekend playing golf. I don't go out and play tennis. I don't gamble. So it's like, what's so fun? Oh, making music, no matter how bad it is. So I always encourage people, I go, don't let anyone ever tell you it's stupid or that it's lame or whatever. Just have fun.
That's absolutely
you don't go paint because you think you're going to make a living as a painter. You do it because it makes you feel good.
Right.
And so even now, today, my friends and I will get together every once in a while and let's just make some noise.
You have an amazing story that we really have to abbreviate, but you went from GW.
Yes.
You started working for the Washington Post. You stayed in bands afterwards.
Yes.
But you end up in LA. Give us the elevator speech version of how that happened.
So, yes. So when you and I left GW, 2 weeks out of college, I got a job at the Washington Post, just answering phones, sorting mail. Within 2 weeks of that, of starting, I was a month out of college, the music reviewer for the Washington Post saw me working on a Sunday. There was no one in the newsroom. I was there just in case the phones rang. And he sent me out. He said, I had long hair back then. Right. And he said, do you want to go review a concert? Do you know how to write? Have you ever written before? And I said, well, I just graduated. I've written college papers. He goes, go review this band for me. I don't want to go. And he goes, oh, you're too young. You're not going to know the Mamas and the Papas. And I'm like, I know the Mamas and Papas, right. California Dreamin', John Phillips, everything. So I went out and did that review, and they actually published it. So a month out of college, I got my first review in the Washington Post for music, and from that point on, for the next 6 years, he just gave me every single concert he didn't want to review. So that's where my music tales come in, was there at the Post. But then I moved, I took a dare from a friend, made a call to Jay Leno's manager, cold called her as a dare and a joke.
And this is right when Johnny was leaving and Jay was starting.
Correct. And so she hired me over the phone to come work on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno as a talent executive booker. So I would book people on the Tonight Show.
And you would do the pre-interviews, and it's not just lining someone up. You would spend
Correct,
time
correct.
with
Well, I
them.
got promoted to that 6 months after I was at The Tonight Show into a segment producer. So what you do is you call people up. They have a project coming up, whether it's a band, TV show, movie. You talk to their publicist and you say, hey, come do our show instead of Letterman. Come do our show instead of whatever. And then they say yes, and then you go, okay, I'll interview them before they come on, so Jay has some talking points. So either the bands, comedians, or actors or sports stars would come on the show. I would interview them before they came on the show, find out what their talking points were, and then I would write up the interview for Jay. So that's how I got to meet and mingle with all these people.
What a good segue, because I have my notes from you right here.
Yeah.
Last night you sent me all sorts of great notes. There's so much here, and I know why you wrote it, partly because it's what you do for a living, and partly because there's so much here. I can't possibly memorize all of this. But so in your job as a segment producer, it would be really fun to talk about Bobcat Goldthwait and all the crazy people you've had on.
Bobcat's the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of
Bobcat,
crazy.
because I went out and I watched him burn
Oh, you
Jay's
came
couch.
to visit me when
Yeah.
Bobcat was on the show.
When he
right.
burned his couch.
Right.
I watched that live. But anyway, and there's a million stories there, but
Yes.
here you are on Guitar Tales. The quantity on this list, we won't be able to come anywhere near
Okay.
the full breadth of this list, but
Okay.
you have interacted with some amazing musicians, guitar players, and otherwise.
Yes.
So there's a story behind all of them. I have a partial list here, and it's crazy. Just give us anecdotes as we go through them. You know my favorite. I just hit my mic there. Pete Townsend.
Yes, from The Who.
You've met him.
Yes, and Daltrey. So what was weird is that The Who were on a hiatus. This would have been early 90s.
Okay.
And Daltrey came on the show to do, Daltrey's whole thing was like Daltrey sings Townsend. He would
Yeah, I
label
remember
his
that.
tours differently.
Yeah.
But it was all the same. It's like, well, when haven't you been singing Townsend songs?
Right, right.
So he came on The Tonight Show for one of those projects, and he was singing Who songs, I'm sure. But yeah, so I got to interview him and spend
Super
some
nice
time
guy,
with
I
him.
would imagine.
Probably one of the nicest guys in rock that I've met.
Right.
So down to earth. Was hanging out all day. Told me a story about finding out at age. Back then he was probably in his 50s, but he had found out within the last year that he had another kid that he didn't know about.
Oh my
He has
God.
like 8 kids or something.
Okay.
And I was like, well, that must have been weird because the kid was like in his 20s or something. And he
Right.
was like, no, it was great. I love it. I love having another kid.
He's a positive energy guy.
So positive energy. And so I never did this on a regular basis because in TV, and when you're backstage with these celebrities, there's a rule you don't bother them for pictures or autographs.
Right.
But when you call them on the phone ahead of time, you're doing the interview, what I would always do is saying, hey, there's some people on the staff that are going to want autographs. How do you feel about that? Depending on the celebrity, a lot of them will be like, yeah, no problem. Some of them
Some
will
are-
just go like, hey, I
yeah.
prefer not to, because
Right.
it gets out of hand, depending on who it is. So I had asked Daltrey the day before, hey, you cool if people ask for some autographs? So I brought in my Who's Next vinyl, and I'm in his dressing room, and he's like being so chatty and nice, and he signs it, and he's like, hey, do you want John to sign it? And I'm like, Entwistle?
He was still alive.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was playing with his band that night. And so he walks me down the hall, introduces me to John Entwistle, who signs my Who's Next record. I'm on cloud 9. And then maybe a year later, Townsend came on.
Okay.
Doing his solo thing, and I brought my Who's Next record. I also brought along the inside poster.
Quadrophenia.
Was it Quadrophenia? There was a picture of Townsend, and I think it's at Woodstock, of him leaping in the air, and it's
No,
taken
that would be
from
live
behind.
at Leeds then, probably.
Okay, so I got that signed for you,
Yeah.
which you probably don't even know where it is anymore. But I remember I
I could picture it
specifically
in my head, yeah.
had Townsend sign it for you. But he was not like Daltrey. He was very intimidating, very, very quiet, not warm, I would say.
He's a troubled man. I mean, I've read his books.
Right.
He's got some issues.
Right.
Whereas Daltrey got beaten up when he was young, came out on the other side, and came out a very positive man.
Yeah. He was great.
Let me read for you. We've got a list here. I'm going to read a few of the names for you.
Okay.
And then I want you to just share with us any anecdotes you might have
Sure.
about these folks. I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's too much. Robert Plant, Rod Stewart, Hart, Kiss, The Scorpions, Ted Nugent, Iggy Pop, Cheap Trick, Joe Cocker, Ringo Starr, The Band, Moody Blues, Phil Collins, Sting, Lou Reed, Snoop Dogg, Ray Manzarek, Ozzy, Meatloaf, Dave Crosby, Graham Nash, Little Richard, Brian Ferry, Ray Davies.
Yeah.
Choose.
Okay, so my hero, Robert Plant, he was coming on the show, and I was absolutely terrified because, I had a Led Zeppelin poster on my wall from the time I was probably 13, and here was this guy standing in front of me. Couldn't have been nicer, again. Such a sweet guy, and, you think like, oh, what do you talk about with a famous musician that you idolized? He and I talked about property in Oregon.
Oh, that's
because
great.
he was going to buy some land in Oregon, and I told him that's where my family originated, in Hood River, and we started talking about Oregon. And it was so cool to just have this conversation with someone that's not anything about music. And we really got into it about the progressive nature of Oregon and the state government and the land and all that stuff. So he couldn't have been cooler.
I was watching Kennedy Honors. They have that.
Oh, you're right, the John F. Kennedy Honors, right.
He cried.
Oh yeah, when they were playing his music. Yeah.
They did "Stairway to Heaven."
Right.
It was Hart.
Hart.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And a Nancy Wilson, and I forgot who else was on guitar. But it was someone very well known. And you look, they did a close up because why wouldn't they? And he's crying with joy.
Right.
As
yeah.
he's watching them do it.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
So, anyways, so what was weird about that day was that I had 2 guests on the show that day, which I normally would only have 1. But I had George Foreman, the boxer, on the same time as Robert Plant was on. So oddly, I'm in the dressing room talking to Robert Plant, and then he says at one point, would you mind introducing me to George? And I was like, sure. So I walk into George Foreman's room, and he has this small entourage there. And I was like, George, I go, Robert Plant, the other guest on the show, would like to meet you. Is that cool if I bring him in? And he was like, who's that?
I knew you were going to say that.
And I said, oh, he was the lead singer of Led Zeppelin. And he's like, oh, I don't really know that music. I go, yeah, it's okay. He just wants to say hi because Plant was a big boxing fan.
Oh, right.
So it was just funny to watch.
Did he let him?
Yeah, I go back and get Robert Plant. I walk in. I go, hey, George, this is Robert and everything. And what's just so funny is he's like, oh, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Robert Plant wanted to take a picture with George Foreman.
Wow.
And then after they take their picture and everything, George says, hey, I should listen to some of your music. And they was like, yeah, get George's CD, would you? And it just made me laugh, the idea of George Foreman getting in his limo afterwards and taking a Robert Plant CD and listening to the song.
That's very funny.
But it was just, again, the interactions. Another one I thought was when I had David Crosby on the show. And again, Crosby, Stills and Nash, hippie era, Woodstock, 50th anniversary, by the way, this year. And at the same night, I had Dennis Hopper on. Okay, so 2 counterculture icons on the same show. And the same thing, I'm in the dressing room talking to David Crosby, and he goes like, hey, Hopper's on the show. Can you take me to see him? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I walk down the hall, knock on the door.
But they're the same generation.
Well, it's the same generation. You imagine what those 2 must have gone through together in the 60s.
Yeah.
And so I open the door. I'm like, hey, Dennis, you have an old friend here. And Crosby looks at Hopper, and they look at each other, and he just says, man, did you ever think we'd live this long? They just hug each other, and I'm like, that is such a cool moment, because either one of those guys could have been a casualty of the 60s.
No. Yeah.
So that was some of the fun, is when you meet...
And that's organic, because
exactly.
It's not playing for anyone.
Right.
Except for
their
a podcast
interactions
20 years later.
When they're alone together are so much different, again, than anything you'd ever see on TV. I had another thing... And he's a guitarist, so it counts in Guitar Tales, is Johnny Depp, right? So Johnny Depp came on the show, and Johnny's an unusual guy, as you can imagine. He's very quiet, very hard to read and everything. So as a joke, and this is a weird, circuitous story, but I promise it has an ending. So I had gotten a bunch of T-shirts, and this won't mean anything. We'll throw up a still store later of who it is. But you know Ernest Borgnine, the old actor.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Grumpy old man actor.
Right.
When he retired from acting, he was in his 80s, he decided he was going to...
He passed away recently.
I don't know how long ago, probably.
He did.
But he decided he was going to... This was a real thing. He was going to go on tour across America in a motorhome.
Borgnine.
Ernest Borgnine, 83-year-old actor from McHale's Navy, and I think he
He's
won
like
an
a
Oscar
pudgy,
at
tough
one
kind of
point.
guy,
Right.
yeah.
But... And he was in his 80s and decided he was just going to drive around the United States in a motorhome and put lawn chairs outside and have people come up and just talk to him so that they could meet him. And so his manager put out these T-shirts that said Ernest Borgnine on tour, and it had a tour bus and a star coming out and Ernest Borgnine's face on it. And it just struck me as the most hysterical thing in the world, like unintentionally funny. It sounded like a punk band, Ernest Borgnine on tour, right?
Yeah.
So I had 2 of these promo T-shirts, and Johnny Depp had never done The Tonight Show before, notoriously shy interview. And I thought, I got to do something to make him feel good and thank him for doing the show.
And open him up.
Open him up. So I'm like, I had 2 of these T-shirts. I'm like, he will get this, and he will get the humor in it. So I go to his dressing room, and you know, he's smoking a cigarette and nervous and quiet and everything, and we're talking. I'm trying to loosen him up. I'm like, hey, I got a gift from you. This is from my own personal collection, and thank you for coming on the Tonight Show. I don't know, you know, I think it's hilarious. And I give him the T-shirt, and he puts it, and he takes it, and he looks at it, and he puts it down on the couch in the dressing room, and he sits there with his cigarette like this, looking at it. And he's just looking at it, and he just goes, that's fucking genius. And I was so thrilled that he liked it.
Because it could have gone in any direction.
It could have gone like, what the hell is this guy giving me? And he was so mesmerized. And then just goes, this is fucking genius. And I was like, oh, I'm glad you like it. He's like, dude, where did you get these? Where did you get these?
And you gave him the whole backstory.
And I was like, and I was like, I only have one more, which that second one I gave to Mike Myers from Austin Powers fame for the same reason. I knew he would get it.
Right.
Which he did. They both thought
he
it
would
was
love
hilarious.
it even more, I would think.
But the Johnny Depp thing was on the same night I had Johnny Depp on the show, I had David Hasselhoff, right? And Hasselhoff, his singing career.
Oh, yeah, he's big in Germany.
Yeah,
He's huge in
and
Germany.
so he was actually performing that night on The Tonight Show as a singer. Yeah. And at one point, I'm in Johnny Depp's dressing room, and he was like, hey, man, can you introduce me to David Hasselhoff?
Because he's iconic in his own weird kind of way.
So we had David Hasselhoff CDs to promote.
Yeah.
And Johnny goes, can you get me David Hasselhoff's autograph on my CD? I'm like, well, you come ask him yourself, man. So
he was shy about it.
So I take Johnny Depp in to meet Hasselhoff, and he's like, can you sign this? And so Hasselhoff goes to sign it. He's like, oh, you want to make it to Johnny? He goes, no, make it to Gibby. Gibby. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So he does it and everything. And I kind of, it was one of those moments where it's like, I think Hasselhoff, I worked with him a lot, is the most sincere man in the world. He was like, oh, Johnny Depp wants my autograph, but it was to Gibby. And I realized later it was for Gibby Haynes, who was the leader of the Butthole Surfers.
Oh.
And so it was one of Johnny's punk rock fans.
Do you think it was in Johnny's head an ironic gift?
Of course, absolutely, 100%.
So he was actually insulting
So he was
Hoff.
giving one of the preeminent punk godfathers a David Hasselhoff CD.
Yeah, so it was actually very disrespectful in retrospect to Hasselhoff.
Yeah, again, but I do think there was a genuine affection for him.
But and I've heard his interviews. He's very self-effacing. He knows what he is and what he's not.
Completely.
And he takes all that to the bank.
Yes.
Give me some more names.
Give him more names. So Ringo Starr, me being the biggest Beatles fan in the world, this was at a different show. This was at the Late Late Show on CBS that I was producing. And normally I had now graduated to be an executive producer, so now I had people working for me that did what I used to do. So they would interview the guests, write up the interview, brief them, and meet them.
You're going to review it, though.
Yes, I would approve it. But on this case, I said to the staff, sorry, Ringo Starr's coming on. I'm doing it.
You're a
as
Beatles fanatic.
I'm
You've
a Beatles
always
fanatic,
been,
and I need to meet a Beatle, and so I'm taking this one myself, even though it's not my job anymore. So I get to interview Ringo. It's very cool, and I say to Ringo at the time, Ringo, I am going to be inundated with autograph requests. Are you cool with that? And he said, yes, but I'd like to do it all at once in one sitting. So I don't want people coming up all day long doing it.
Right.
Just collect them and do it in one sitting. So I said, okay, I'll make sure that happens. So of course I bring in my Sgt. Pepper vinyl, like the original from '67 that I got from my older brother.
Right.
And then I had tons of people on the staff. You can imagine, can you get him to sign this, get him to sign that? So he comes that day, and now mind you, Lennon had been murdered, and George Harrison, people don't remember this, an intruder had broken into George Harrison's home and tried to stab him while he was in bed.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, that was a big deal. So now you've got 2 Beatles left. You got Ringo and Paul. Now imagine what their security must be like around those guys, right?
Yeah.
And the paranoia they must have on an everyday basis.
Right.
But Ringo's totally cool. And his security guy is a guy not much bigger than me, older gentleman, doesn't look like a big bruiser at all. And he comes up to me and he says, listen, just go over some protocol. I was like, sure, whatever you need. He goes, Ringo's going to stay in his dressing room. I will walk him from dressing room to rehearsal, and then I'll walk him back. I'd prefer if people didn't approach him, only you. I'd like to have one person that's my contact. And I said, that's fine.
And by the way, this is so good that you took that gig.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, even forgetting that you're selfish reason, I think from a professional point of view,
right,
as you look at it, that was the better call anyway.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure they were taken care of. So, so I bring in my pile of stuff for Ringo to sign, and he's very nicely signing it and everything. And then it's like, okay, that's it, no more autographs. So close the door, we're getting ready to do the show, and his security guard's standing in front of his door, really mellow, quiet guy. The show's getting ready to start, and I have a staff member who worked at CBS, was not on my staff, but he worked at CBS, comes rushing up to me with the Beatles record. And he's like, Todd, you got to get Ringo to sign this for me, please. It's for my son. It's his bar mitzvah coming up, and he's a Beatle fanatic. I'm like, hey, man, like, we can't. He doesn't want to sign anymore. They were really strict about that. And he's like, this guy was sweating because he realized he was late getting there to get his thing signed. So he was like, come on, you don't know how much this means to him. He's a huge Beatle fan. This is gonna be. I'm like, hey, man, I'm serious. I really can't.
And it is a professional boundary.
Yeah.
I've learned that from my friendship with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the security guard comes over real mellow. He's like, hey, Todd, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, yeah, no problem. And I walk away and he goes, listen. And he's so calm and professional. He's like, the man you're speaking to, I don't like his vibe. He's a little agitated. I can see he's perspiring. And this is like 20 feet across a hallway, And he's like, and I just don't like his body language. Do you mind if you kind of walk him away from the dressing room? And I was like, no problem. And then and I said to the guy, I go, look, man, you're freaking out as a security guard.
Yeah.
No is no. So you got to be, again, you have to be respectful of their space. And some of them will hang out all day long and talk to you. Some will just hide in their dressing room. It's like, I don't want to talk until I'm ready to rehearse.
And it's a matter, like you're pointing out, it's a matter of personal security. So like you could have people who might be like that because they're arrogant or distant or unappreciative of fans or whatever.
Right.
You got people who are shy, and we all assume they can't be shy because they're rich and famous, but they still might be shy, or they might be worried about being attacked.
Right.
Again,
I've done so many shows with musicians and rock stars and rappers. I've done a lot of shows with rappers and everything. And when you're standing next to them in a public situation or crowd situation, it's a totally different vibe because you realize how dangerous and uncomfortable it can get.
Right.
So I did a music show for YouTube called Sugar last year, and we had a Puerto Rican rapper, Bad Bunny. Okay. He's humongous now in the Latin American community, but now he's broken through to mainstream. And we took him to Austin, Texas, and we were doing
great music town.
Great music town, and we did an outdoor, spontaneous show.
Like a pop-up show.
Pop-up show.
Right.
At an outdoor food court, and those people mobbed him, and they had like zero regard for his personal space. And I was standing next to him. So, the smallest guy in the crew, me, he had a security guard, but the security guard and I were literally putting our forearms out to push people out of the way. They were reaching over us. They were grabbing his clothes, and it's like, you can see how weird that must be.
And the funny thing is, we're both in our mid-50s.
Well, you are. I went down 10 years since college.
You took that off. You paid a lot of money, though. When you're really young, when one is really young, that would seem attractive, maybe. I look at that and I think I would never want my life to have ever gone in that. I would not be envious on any level to living that kind of life, no matter how much adulation, no matter how much it fed my frail ego,
right?
No matter how much money it put in the bank, I would not want that life.
Right.
I don't think that would be a satisfying life.
Yeah, I mean, you literally cannot go anywhere without being stopped.
Right.
Or bothered, or the selfies. It always shocks me, having been around so many celebrities, just how bold people are to go up to them.
Right.
And I worked with Jay Leno for so many years, and he was the nicest guy in the world, and it didn't matter. He would sign every autograph, take every picture. And then I've been around others that are just like, once it starts, it never stops. And it's true, they can't get out, they can't move from point A to point B.
And so what I like about what you've gotten to understand, live, and experience really is that you will see the persona, right? But then when you're doing the pre-interview or as the executive producer stepping in on a pre-interview, you see the human side. I think we as consumers of entertainment stop seeing them as people.
Yes.
And I think it's easy to do. There's probably some latent resentment floating around. They're famous, they're wealthy, you know, they have all the extra benefits in life that we don't get. But you see those two different versions of them. And you have to, because you see it. You see them as people.
Well, there are situations too where, you know, I'm going to meet somebody who's famous that you've known your whole life through movies, TV, music, whatever, and they're exactly like you expected them to be.
In a bad way.
Good or bad.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And other people, it's like, oh my God, that person is so different than what they're like on stage. It's usually the comedians. You know what I mean?
They're probably always usually more serious in person. They're not on. They're not on.
Definitely. Well, again, it's weird because there's those comedians that are the exact opposite of the way they are on TV, and then there's the ones where they're too on all the time.
Right,
I won't name names, but I worked with a really, really, really famous comedian, and he just would not turn it off. And
Because
we were trying to do business. It's like I'm trying to produce a show, and so my whole thing was always like, while we're riffing about what the show is going to be, I'm not going to laugh at all your jokes, but it's not because I don't think they're funny. And I'll say this to them. Yeah. It's like I'm taking notes and thinking how to execute that.
It's positions on the stage. It's how long you want the first second shorter than the
and like, wait a minute, should we show the picture there? We should hold it later. Should we do? So I'm thinking, and so I've worked with some comedians where I'm just kind of like straight faced, and they're performing in the pitch meeting and stuff, and it's like it's weird because you start laughing, and my friend. One of my writer friends and I had this famous comedian we were working with, and he just, again, it got exhausting because everything they said was a joke. You couldn't, it's like we need to talk serious a little bit to get the business part done. And like, we'd laugh. We were with him for a week, and the beginning of the week, we're laughing at everything he says and everything. And by the third day, I look over at my friend and I busted him. I go, "You're doing the fake laugh because you're not making noise. He's just doing this." But not making any noise, and I'm like, yeah, we're tired of laughing on it.
If that person didn't become a comedian, they would just be the annoying coworker in your life. Because they're just wired like that, and they were fortunate enough to find their way into... I know lawyers like that.
Right.
I know lawyers where I think he would be a great sidekick on the Howard Stern show because you're just wired in this wonderfully witty, manic way that's very entertaining, and that could translate into a lot of things. But then you get the comedians who, you know, have an act... And then in private, they're probably very quiet and serious.
Steve Martin. So this is not Guitar Tales, but it's an amusing anecdote. So I heard many, many times that Steve Martin.
He plays banjo.
Yeah, that's okay. He's a musician. He's
why you brought it up.
Banjo player. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
And he's a good banjo player.
Very good.
But so I was producing the Queen Latifah's daytime show, and he came on the show with his band to play banjo, and he's famously shy and not really open to the fan greeting thing, right? So I'm walking by his dressing room, and he's sitting there alone on the couch. He's got his banjo, and I'm walking by, and I'm like, okay, he's a comedy hero of mine, but I don't want to bother him. Then I'm like, hey, you know what? Forget that. I'm the producer of the show. I have every right to go in and say hi to him and welcome him and thank him for doing the show. And so I go to the door, and he's sitting right there, and I kind of knock, and I go, hey, Steve, I'm Todd. I'm the producer of the show. And I start walking towards him, and I swear to God, he pulls a fake one of these. He's like this. He goes like this. I'll do that over. So I go to walk towards him and to say, hi, I'm Todd. I'm the producer of the show. And he pulls one of these. Oh, hey, how's it going? Yeah. Okay, And so I just go, okay, and I back out the room. But what he doesn't know is I can see his phone is on lock. So Steve Martin totally dissed me with a fake phone call.
That's great.
Because he just didn't want to deal, and I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm like, all right.
And he's a very cerebral guy. Very cerebral, and he seems like a kind man, too. But, you know.
Yeah. But the musicians then are different because they're not trying to be on with their thing. But what I did notice is a lot of the musicians are just much quieter. And again, some of them got into music because they weren't great interacting or talking. Like Lou Reed was not a talkative guy at all. In fact, kind of a little surly and grumpy.
I would think.
Right. And so
that doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me either. So that's what I was saying about the time where somebody is exactly like you think they're going to be. Like,
Right.
The guys in Kiss, one of them is incredibly warm and nice and welcoming. And
That would not be someone named Gene.
the other one is not so. The other one is more sarcastic and straight to the point and doesn't suffer fools and is like,
That would be Gene. Yeah, you can't
you
say.
name the names. But
Yeah.
so yeah, again, it's like when you meet someone, you're like, oh my God, they're just like I thought they were going to be. That's so cool. They were awesome. And then other ones where it's kind of like, oh, they're an asshole,
Wow.
and it kind of disappoints you. It's like, oh, that was my hero. There's an old saying about be careful when you meet your heroes.
There's a whole thing on Volume. They have a show like that.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's great. It's fabulous. And there's I forgot the title, but it's something like that where they talk about that what you just said. You should be a
Right.
producer.
Yeah.
But they talk about whether you were either you found everything you hoped for in
Right.
meeting your hero or this incredible level of disappointment.
Right.
And I don't think it's Eddie Trunk. It's it's one of those
Yeah.
kind of shows.
But they're, the guys again that you expect to be like they are. They've done so much media interviews that you kind of know them already. Like
Right.
Rod Stewart and Sting. When I worked with Sting, he was so funny because he said, listen, he came to the show and he's like, I said, Sting, you didn't do a pre-interview with me yesterday, so I have to do one today before the show. And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. And it's like, I've done this a million times, done a million interviews.
Right.
I don't need you, punk. But I had to. It was my job. And
And
so,
you can get in trouble if you don't.
yeah. And so after rehearsal, I watched his rehearsal. And I'm like, Sting, is there any way you got 2 minutes to sit down? And he's like, who are you again? And I said, I'm your segment producer. And he goes, segment producer? What the fuck is that? And I go, that means I'm doing your pre-interview. He goes, I don't need a pre-interview. I was like, oh, okay. And Rod Stewart was the same. He was like, I'm not doing this. And this is the day of the show. And I was like, well, Rod, I go, it's fine. I just, like to have the host be able to have some bullet points for you. He goes, you don't need bullet points. And so the host of the show was like, no, give me something. I need just something. So I wrote up this thing about Rod Stewart. And the notes are on the host's desk. And it was Leno, and Leno's interviewing Rod, and the first question, I had read something about his pets in his house and how it was bugging his wife, and so I gave it to Jay because it was a funny little anecdote for him to tell, and he just goes, what are you looking at? He pulls my notes off Jay's thing, and he just goes, throws them. He goes, you don't need those. I was like, okay, well, there's a day's work, but
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
But that makes for good TV too, because
Absolutely.
it created
Absolutely.
even the absence of you coming up with the fake notes. You wouldn't have had that great moment when he was ripping that up and creating some great TV.
And then Ted Nugent was another guy who was exactly like.
So he's an asshole.
Well, look, let's just take the politics aside.
Yeah. He's
When
musically generous.
Yeah, but my meeting with him was really weird because what had happened was I was working on a late night show with Magic Johnson, the
Right.
ill-fated, horrible late night show. But at the time I was also trying to create shows, and I read an interview with Ted Nugent, and it wasn't about the political stuff. It was just him being outrageous.
Yeah.
And I just went to my agent. I go, Ted Nugent is such an outrageous talker. Like, I'd love to try to do a show with him.
God did not give
And
him a filter.
no filter.
Yeah.
And so my agent hooks it up, and like I write up this idea of a talk show with Ted Nugent and everything, and she hooks it up where she's like, okay, Ted's going to be in LA, and they'll meet with you, but he's only going to be here on a weekend. And I go, I'll have a barbecue, and he can come to my house for a barbecue. And so she's like, okay. So me and my friends, I'm like, hey guys, want to have a barbecue with Ted Nugent? And we just had a small 10 people or something.
And you made it all vegetarian, I'm sure.
Yeah, I got the meat out for that one.
Yeah.
And it's just so surreal to have him coming to my house, and he's sitting in the backyard, and we're sitting at a picnic table in my backyard, and he's eating corn, and he's got like this bushy mustache, and he's like, hey Todd, this is some good corn. And like my childhood self, again, my adult
Double
self
Life
with
Gonzo.
the politics, double life Gonzo, Cat's Cat. My childhood self is going like, Ted Nugent's sitting here and eating my corn on the cob in my house. Like, I had a poster of him when what is he doing? What am I doing here? And what is he doing here? So there's a lot of those moments where it's like I said, with Robert Plant, I was like, these are people I worshipped. And I can't believe I'm talking to them.
And it doesn't, I know, because I know you, it never goes away. It's
doesn't.
not like you've been in the industry
27 years.
27 years. I was going to say 25. 27 years. And you'll still have the same childish
Absolutely.
looking, childlike, not childish.
You know, here's the thing too, is I always say to people, is once that goes away, it's time to get out of the business. Because I do have a lot of friends who are very cynical about it, and they're like, who cares? And it's like, no, I come from a small town in the middle of nowhere, you know, Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Never dreamed in a bazillion years that I would be working here. It just wasn't even a concept to work in Hollywood. So I still, when I'm there, I still pinch myself and go like, I can't believe I'm sitting here meeting a hero of mine.
Yeah,
and again, sometimes disappointed, but most of the time like, wow.
But even when you're disappointed, that's educational.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know, a negative experience is a good experience because it just helps you understand the human condition.
Yeah.
You might actually find yourself having empathy toward someone you used to think led this wonderful life, and you're like, wow, this person's locked inside this really bad place. And I see all their trappings of wealth and fame and all that, and I'm happier as a human than the person I used to worship. And that, you can grow from that.
Yeah, you see, again, the artist side of them and the human side of them.
Right.
And sometimes those things, I worked a lot with Dweezil Zappa, Frank Zappa's son. And Dweezil's a very quiet guy. And I noticed whenever I would talk to him or do briefings with him or whatever, he always had his guitar in his hand and would constantly be noodling. And I realized it's like, okay, that's his thing. He likes
connection to Dad too.
And it's his comfort level to have the instrument in his hand and constantly noodling on it, you know, as opposed to putting it down and talking like we're doing.
Right.
And I get it. It's like, okay, that's his thing. And the other thing is you have to, if you have a quirky musician, you know, okay, so what are their quirks and what do they like, what don't they like, because we have to make the day go well for them.
Right.
So I did this huge show, the iHeartRadio Music Awards show, and it was a massive 3-hour live NBC show, and you know we had Madonna and Taylor Swift and all these huge superstars, and Rihanna and all these people, and it was like, it has to go like clockwork. Like from the time they open the door to that car and they get in there, you better have like the path clear, you know, the dressing room perfect, the rehearsal on time. Now, they'll always be late, but you can't be late.
And it strikes me that an event like that, a great day for you is when you create a scene where you're invisible, where a lack of mistakes and a seamless presentation is a home run for you.
Yes.
Like in other words, if you have a breakout act, they want to be larger than life and all that. But when you're putting a 3-hour, I know that event. That's a gigantic event. The best job you could do is for people to not notice Todd's touch because it was that seamless and that effortless.
Well, and on that show, it was such a massive show. My main goals, I had a boss on that because even when I'm an executive producer, I always have somebody bigger than me or above me that I have to answer to. And on that one, he wanted me to handle the comedy, not the music. He wanted me to handle Jamie Foxx, who was hosting the show. So I was Jamie's person for that show. But I got to see like the machinations that are required to put on those award shows are crazy. Like Rihanna, I remember we were in a meeting, they're like, Rihanna wants to come in on a full-scale helicopter on the stage. So they had to scramble and find a helicopter that they could lower, you know, for her to get out of.
But really, who doesn't want to get onto stage in a helicopter? I mean,
always works as an entrance.
I mean, we did it with our band.
Yeah.
Remember that helicopter?
Oh, yeah.
So, listen, Todd, I want to thank you so much for coming and doing the show with us.
Sure, this hasn't been too boring because it's not about guitars.
It's very boring. All the YouTube haters are gonna come after us, but you know, I owed it to you.
That's what editing is. That's my edit sign. Edit me down.
I like that. So listen, I want to thank our dear friends at Riverview Studios. You know, we brought Todd in, and Todd was great enough to come in. We've gone a full season here in Guitar Tales. We wanted Todd to cap off our season for us. Season 2 is coming up. We have some really exciting stuff planned. Many thanks to Riverview Studios. Come check out the studio if you have any video needs of any sort. As always, we want to thank Scott Guitar Stengel. We're planning a roundtable of guitar players and music promoters to kick off season 2. It should be a lot of fun. So thank you, everyone. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. That'll help us let you know when new shows are coming out. Thank you so much and have a great day.